Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. This webinar will be the first webinar of a GSC e-learning series, and in today's webinar we will cover CPNP process and all the requirements that are needed to export your cosmetic product to EU states and UK. Before we start, I want to thank our partner TRC for joining us today. So let's not waste time and just start with the presentation. So in today's webinar, we will cover the following points. First of all, I will start with a fast introduction of GSC and TRC. Then Jasper will continue with the EU and UK cosmetic definition of cosmetic product and categories. And I will give you a really fast description of the market insight and trends of K-beauty product in EU. Following, Jasper will explain all the CPNP process and all the requirements that you need to prepare. And in the end, we will finish with a Q&A session, replying to some of the questions that you sent us through the application form. I just want to remind you that you can keep in touch with us during the whole webinar through the chat that you can see below. In case you have any question, please leave a message in the chat, and an expert from GSC will be glad to reply to you on real time. Besides that, let's start. Today's speaker will be Jasper, Business Development Director and co-owner of TRC, and he will give you a fast introduction of himself and his company like a few minutes later. And then there is me. Let me introduce myself. I'm Rossellaga, and I've been in Korea for 11 years. I have a background in business and international trade, and I'm been working with Korean companies since 6 years ago, mainly in the pharmaceutical and cosmetic industry. I joined GSC around 1 year ago, and I'm in charge of all the regulatory affair, which means that if you need information for CPNP procedure, FDA registration procedure, and other procedure to register your product in Asia, you can contact me anytime. Let me now give you a really fast introduction of our company. GSC Global Standard Certification was established in 2017, and even though it's a quite new company, we already reached last year in 2022 a revenue of 3 billion. The company is also a certification body under the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy for all the ISO certification, and we are also Europe ESG evaluation platform official partner for EcoVadis. Talking about the main business, we can say that the main company business are focusing on system certification. So as I mentioned before, like all the ISO certification, then product certification such as gluten-free, non-GMO, halal, and we are also the main partner and contact point in Korea for Eat Vegan. At the same time, we are also offering services for product registration, and this is what I do. Registration such as CPNP notification for Europe Cosmetic. We can also help you out with all the FDA registration and also additional registration in the Southeast Asia. I will now leave the word to Jasper. So please, Jasper, introduce yourself and your company.
Thank you very much, Rossellaga. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. Briefly about the regulatory company. The company has been established in 2008. We have seen strong and consistent growth since 2018, when we moved from a one-man company to a bigger team. We work with a highly experienced and qualified team consisting of toxicologists, safety assessors, and people with long experience as a regulatory project manager. We have a very extensive network in compliance and safety for both food supplements and for cosmetics. We are, for example, members of the CTPA in the UK, the Dutch Cosmetics Association in the Netherlands, and we are also a member of the Personal Care Products Council in the USA. And we are also one of the initial members of the European Responsible Person Association called ERPA. The focus of our services is on cosmetics and food supplements and some related product categories. Apart from looking into regulatory compliance and safety, we also provide services such as training, consultancy, and some companies have outsourced the regulatory function to the regulatory company. And when related to cosmetic products, we also provide breach compliance management services. Over the past years, we have developed our own product regulatory information management system called PRINT, which is a cloud-based solution where we continuously monitor product compliance and safety according to the regulations in the EU, the UK, and very soon also the USA. We have offices both in the EU and the UK. Let's start with the definition of a cosmetic product as it is defined in the EU and in the UK, and what kind of cosmetic products fall within this definition. Well, first of all, a cosmetic product is defined as a substance or a mixture which is placed in contact with the external parts of the human body. So this means the skin, the hair, the nails, the lips, but also the external genitals, and for example, the teeth and the mucous membranes in the oral cavity, so in the mouth. And cosmetic products are exclusively or primarily intended to clean or to perfume or to change the appearance. Think, for example, about color cosmetics, to protect or to keep in good condition or to correct body odors, for example, in the case of deodorants. So let's now go to an overview table to see where there might be some differences between the EU and Korea and the USA. Here you can see on the left a number of cosmetic product subcategories, so hair care, skin care, color cosmetics, antiperspirants, sunscreen, etc. And you see the EU, Korea, and the USA on top in this overview table. And here you see that what falls under a cosmetic product, or what is classified as a cosmetic product, is very similar between the EU and Korea, where only hand sanitizers are not considered cosmetic products because their primary function is to sanitize and to be antibacterial. In the USA, for example, antiperspirants and sunscreen products are not considered cosmetic products and fall under the OTC category. Before we continue to Rosella to highlight some details on K-beauty in Europe, first a little bit of introduction on the market size of cosmetic products in the EU, or in Europe, I must say, so including the UK, where you can see that, of course, Spain, France, Italy, the UK, and Germany are very big markets. But for example, also Poland is a very relevant market when it comes to cosmetics. On the right, you see the details split out per subcategory within the total cosmetics product portfolio, where you see that skincare is the biggest section, followed by toiletries, hair care products, fragrances, and decorative cosmetics, such as makeup and nail polishes. Let's now turn back to Rosella to give some more detail on K-beauty in Europe.
Thank you, Jasper, for the introduction. We will now cover all the market insights and trends of a K-beauty product in EU. It's safe to say that in the past few years, we saw a lot of interest, an increase in interest for Korean beauty in Europe, and not only actually, but speaking about Europe, we can see that also many European producers are now trying to follow the trends of a Korean cosmetic product, not only the product itself, but also the, let's say, the kind of skincare routine that Koreans are using to take care of themselves. So in the graph, you can see the graph on the left, you can see the country which showed in the last few years most enthusiasm in Korean product, and you can see in first place we have Spain, followed by Germany and UK, and Italy and France. These in Europe are the country which showed most interest in Korean product, and it means that might be your target country after you do the CPNP notification. On the right, we can see the product, the category of product that were most demanded by EU consumers in the last year. And surprisingly, we can see an increase of demand for like powder products and lips product. And this might be because of the end of the pandemic. Now, Europeans are not requested to wear any mask anymore, and this showed not only actually for Korean product, but also for European product as well, an increase of demand for these two categories. So let me now introduce to you the most used purchasing channel by EU consumers. Before we start, I wanna mention the difference between the selling channel of any kind of cosmetic between Korea and EU. In fact, in EU, the main channel are usually pharmacy, drugstores, mart, and online e-commerce. We can find offline stores, but these are usually stores of like, let's say, big chain, such as Sephora. So for this reason, we can see on the first position the global website and app, also for cosmetic product as well. The main e-commerce used by European to purchase cosmetic product at the moment is Yes Style, which is a Hong Kong actually based e-commerce that offer international shipment all around the world and got a revenue of more than $2,000 million like in the past year. On the second position, you can find the national website, which are usually owned by European, but are focusing only on selling like Korean product or Asian product. And these are usually linked with influencers or people who used to live or are living in Korea. So they got a lot of like, let's say, fan who keep purchasing from that website or app. The third position is owned by the national offline shops. As I mentioned before, Sephora is one of that. Then we have the Korean website. In this case, this Korean website and app usually offer a bilingual service and offer also international shipping services. Lastly, you can find the Korean offline shops, and this channel, purchasing channel is increasing, of course, because now after the pandemic, people are starting to travel again. So there are many tourists who come to Korea also with, let's say, the goal to buy Korean cosmetics. Overall, we can see that in the next 7 years, we will face a growth of 11.96%. Before I leave the word to Jasper to cover the CPNP process, I just wanted to mention which could be maybe some strategy to sell your product in the EU market. First of all, I think it's really important to show off and promote the fact that your brand, your product is respecting the European standard and has all the requirements. That's why CPNP notification is not only like required, but is also useful for you and should be used as a marketing point. Second, it's really important and easy for you to find buyers, European buyers or distributors, by joining or visiting the big cosmetic exhibition in Europe. And the biggest one is actually Cosmoprof in Bologna, which is held every year, usually around March. So I highly suggest you, if it's too much to own a booth, to at least visit the exhibition. Lastly, A good help could be emphasized on certifications such as like ban on animal testing or use of harmful ingredient, clean beauty, vegan certification, and so on. Thanks to the, let's say, clean beauty and vegan trends nowadays, this certification could be a good marketing point. Now I will leave the word to Jasper, which will cover the CPNP process and all the requirements that you need to fulfill the CPNP notification. So please, Jasper, continue.
Thank you very much, Rosella. Well, now we know that this is very important opportunities that are present in the European market. I think it is very important to look into the CPNP process and what requirements you have to fulfill to make use of those opportunities. So what do you have to know before you export to the European market? Well, first of all, you have to have a responsible person and you have to have a CPNP notification. If not, then there is no possibility to sell your products in a sustainable and in a growing way in Europe. And this holds for both online and offline channels. The EU and the UK have quite strict cosmetic regulations, and to properly prepare for it, it is fair to say that you need 6 to 12 months. So this means getting all the documentation in up to the moment where you have your products registered and that you are ready to have your products sold in the EU market with a label that is meeting the requirements for Europe. You have to keep in mind the language requirements in Europe. It is one single market with one single notification, but the requirements state that the label needs to be in the language where the product, in the language of the country where the product is sold. So in France, you will have to work with a French label, in Italy with an Italian label, and in Germany with a German label. It is quite customary that you see labels in multiple languages. It is also important to keep in mind that apart from the cosmetic regulations, you also have other requirements, for example, related to packaging waste, which are country by country. So it is not enough to just look into the cosmetic regulations if you want to have a fully compliant product for the EU markets. Also in the area of claims, some claims that can be used in Korea without supporting documentation cannot be used in the EU. So it is very important to work with experienced experts that can support you in how to phrase your claims and to define what substantiation is needed to support those claims. Well, as mentioned before, you have to have a responsible person, you have to have your products assessed and notified in CPNP by a responsible person. And also important to mention is that UK is now separate from the EU. It is a very similar process. There are some regulatory differences, but for the UK, you have to have a separate responsible person and you have to have a separate UK specific notification, which is called SCPN notification, which is Submit Cosmetic Product Notification. So it is very similar, but you have to do it both for the EU and the UK. So let's now go into a bit more detail. We always say that there is a 5-step approach to prepare to export. One is to appoint a responsible person. You have to get all the documentation in, which is the PIF building and management. So this is information about raw materials, formulations, testing, labels, your products, etc., etc. Once your PIF is complete, the product assessment on compliance and on safety can be finalized. And when that is done, and when your product is found to be compliant and safe, then at that stage, everything is known about the product. Also is known what is mandatory to include on a product label. Then the product label can be finalized and your claims can be finalized. And once the label is final, then you can notify your product in CPNP, and then you are ready for export. There is no formal approval procedure. So once the product is notified, basically saying, I want to sell this product, I am the responsible person, this is the name, this is the label, this is the picture of the product, and the exact formula or arranged formula, then you do not have to wait for approval, but you can immediately start selling the product as long as your product contains the languages and also meets the other local requirements of the individual markets where you will be selling. The whole process can be completed in 2, 3, 4 weeks, but of course only if all the required information is available to the assessor to finalize on the assessment and to make sure that everything is included properly on the label. In some cases there may be delays, but let's go into that right now. Yes, please go to the next slide. So what could be big causes of delay? Because it could be done in like 2, 3, 4 weeks. But what we see is that particularly with manufacturers or with brand owners that do not have a lot of experience with the EU or the UK market, it can take a lot of time to get all the information and all the documentation in. So this has to be chased either at your suppliers or it should be chased internally in your own company to make sure that you get everything together. Because only when everything is together, the whole process can be finalized and the product can be prepared for CPNP notification. Another cause of delay could be when the labeling or the claims or both have to be adjusted. Because, of course, you would like to sell your product as much as possible and, of course, with a very good positioning. But not everything is allowed, and not everything is allowed to be claimed. So there, sometimes we see that we have to work with the brand owners to adjust and to see if there is a strong claim, how to make sure that you can get some substantiation or some proof for that claim. And that is also related to the third cause of delay. There are some standard testings that need to be done. For example, stability testing. The testing itself is 3 months, but including sending your samples, getting the testing set up, performing the tests, and then getting the results in, it would be fair to say that it is more than 3-4 months, but it should definitely be possible to do that in 6 months. So this is a mandatory test. Preservation testing or challenge testing, if it needs to be done, also takes a little bit of time. And if batch testing is, for example, needed, it could also take about 3 to 5 weeks. And batch testing could be related to claims, for example. So these are things to keep in mind when you make your planning on when to start and when to be ready for the EU markets. The responsible person, I will now go through the 5 steps that you saw on one of the previous slides. So a little bit of highlights on the responsible person here and then on all the other steps. So the responsible person is the one that is the primary contact point for the EU authorities for any inquiries, any inspections. The responsible person should defend and advocate product compliance and is also liable vis-a-vis the authorities. So if the authorities find that there needs to be corrective actions or there should be a fine for some reason of non-compliance, then they will always go to the responsible person. So this is a key entity or key player for your products. And this responsible person will be responsible to manage and to update PIF to make sure that it always contains all the relevant information for the products. It has to make sure that the safety assessment is performed as defined in the cosmetic regulation, and that a product safety report is prepared. The responsible person also has to make sure that the label and claims meet all the requirements, and not to forget, the responsible person details have to be on the product label. So that is important to mention as well. So this could be in addition to, for example, brand owner names, etc. The responsible person should also make sure that the product is notified with the latest formulation, with the latest artwork, the latest product picture. And of course, you have to make sure that the product is monitored. Is there any adverse events? Are there any reasons why we have to reevaluate if this product is suitable for the consumer? And if there are serious issues with a product, then the responsible person must make sure that there is a proper recall plan in place that can be used to withdraw products that are potentially unsafe, should not be used by the consumer. And this is something that sometimes is forgotten. You have to make sure that the product stays compliant with the cosmetic regulations. The cosmetic regulation is updated quite frequently with new thresholds, new bans, other conditions that are set for specific ingredients. So it is very important to monitor if that has impact on the products that are already in the markets. So let's now go in a bit more detail on the PIF. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I will not go into detail of everything that is stated here, but it is important to realize that you have to collect information related to the raw materials, so the ingredients that you use to create your formulation. And then you have to look at certificates of analysis, technical data sheets, SDSs, etc. For colorants, it is very important to also have information on the purity of the colorant. For fragrances, it is mandatory to have information on the allergens that are included and the percentages of those allergens included in the fragrance. And you should have an IFRS statement, and currently we work with the 50th, the statements based on the 50th Amendment, which basically state how much of a certain fragrance or aroma or an essential oil you should be using as a maximum, depending on the cosmetic product category that we are looking at. So this is all information about the raw materials. Then for the formulation, you of course have to have information on the exact composition, so how much of each ingredient is used, specifications, certificates of analysis for the various product batches, stability records related to shelf life, preservation efficacy related to period after opening, and when the product is in use. Manufacturing method is important, and if applicable, some other testing results could be relevant as well. There's a little bit of more information here as well. So we talked about raw materials, about formulation, but also for packaging, you need to have information that is included in the safety assessments. For each individual product, you need to have the label and the artwork. If you make any claims, very specific claims, you also have to have information, a substantiation where you can that can support the claims that you're making for the product. And of course, you have to have a picture of the product in your product information file. It is also important to have a GMP certificate for the manufacturer. And this is what we consider all input information. And based on all that input information that has to come from the manufacturer or from you maybe as a brand owner, based on all that information, a cosmetic product safety report is prepared. And this then becomes part of what we call the PIF, the full product information file. And of course, when ready, labels, artwork, confirmation of notifications, cosmetovigilance records, and other relevant information that you deem relevant all becomes part of the PIF. And it is very important to realize that you have to manage this continuously. So whenever there's any updates in the raw materials, in the formulations, in information on packaging, any changes at the manufacturer, any adverse events that come to your attention, that all has to be looked into and where appropriate, adjusted in your PIF. And this way you can always ensure the product safety and compliance. So let's go to the next slide then. So with all that information, a safety assessment is performed. It is very clearly defined how that safety assessment needs to be performed. It has to be performed and signed by a qualified safety assessor. And it is very important to realize that it's not a test. We get a lot of questions where people say, can you please perform the testing for me? It is not a test. Safety assessment is combining all the information, as I just mentioned, plus test results, and the total of that is being assessed to define whether or not the product meets all the requirements or not. So it is more a method of evaluation which results in a CPSR, and the responsible person must make sure that it is being performed. Well, I already mentioned that you have to manage it continuously, that you have to adjust for all changes that that may come from your suppliers or from the brand itself, or changes in the regulations. So let's now look at the labeling and the claims. So once the products have been assessed, you know everything that's in the product and you know everything about the product. So what needs to be included on a product label, there are a few mandatory label items, and you can see the example on the right, which lists what items are mandatory. And then for each item, you have to define what is the mandatory content. For example, it is mandatory to have an ingredient list on the product label, but of course the content of the ingredient list has to be looked into as well, and you have to make sure, for example, that the allergens are included in the ingredient label as well. When it comes to claims, it must be cosmetic claims. You cannot have pharma claims, you cannot have biocide claims. It is also important to mention that certifications and logos, these are also considered to be some sort of claims. So when you claim that you are vegan, or that you claim that you are cruelty-free, you have to make sure that you have substantiation for that. It is not sufficient to just state it and that's that. You have to make sure that you can prove that you are meeting more than the requirements of the cosmetic regulations. The cosmetic regulation, for example, states that there is a ban on animal testing. So you cannot say we do not do animal testing as a claim, because by definition, a cosmetic product cannot be tested on animals in the EU. So also related to cruelty-free, you can only claim cruelty-free if you do more than just ensuring that the product is not tested on animals. You also have to make sure that most items are translated in the languages of the country where you will be selling. This is not the case for the ingredient list, because the ingredient list is based on the INCI nomenclature. And there are differences on what can be included on the primary packaging, so the packaging that contains the formulation, secondary packaging, tertiary packaging, or any other packaging component that might be applicable. And of course, it is also important to think about how you would want to sell in Europe and if you will perform any country clustering in terms of languages, if you want to work with inserts, if you want to with booklets or peel-off labels. It's very important to define upfront where you want to sell your products and how you want to address all the labeling requirements, including the languages and the packaging waste requirements. So let's now go to the notification. So for the EU, we have a CPNP notification, and for the UK, we have an SCPN notification. The notifications are done in CPNP, and the information that you enter there is shared among all EU authorities of the individual countries. And some basic RP and product identification data is shared in that database. When you perform a product notification, you have to include the responsible person name and address. This is also where the PIF should be available for inspection. Of course, you have to include things like product name, category and function, product composition, product labels and warnings have to be entered. And in some cases, you also have to enter other relevant specifics, such as does the product contain nanomaterials. For the UK, the process is quite similar, and what needs to be submitted is very similar as in the UK. And I think in general, both for the EU and the UK, you have to take into account that before you can notify products, you first have to create a responsible person account, so for the responsible person as such, and then you have to do the individual product notifications. These have to be done by the RP. And once notified, you can immediately sell the product, so there's no approval procedure.
So what TRC and GSC can do for you, for all the reasons mentioned before, is required to apply for CPNP notification before you export your product to EU states and UK. And this is where like a GSC and TRC can help you. We have a global team, therefore we can support you in different languages, such as like English, Italian, Spanish, French, Dutch, and so on. Also, thanks to TRC, we have a full team of experts that can make the complete assessment of and compliance requirement for the product before exporting the product to the EU market, and can also serve as a responsible person, RP. Also, the lead time is really short. Usually, if you submit in a like good timing all the certification and all the documentation that are needed for applying for the CPNP notification, the lead time for getting the CPNP number is usually between the 3 and the 4 weeks. Lastly, and maybe more important, since there is a cost coming to the, let's say, apply for the CPNP notification, we can help you applying for Korean government incentive programs. Lastly, I want to mention the next seminar. We will have another webinar between September and October, always related to CPNP, but we'll cover in a little bit more detail all the label requirement, all the claims, and the related clinical trial. So please remember to check our newsletter, and if you don't follow our channels, please do it. Now I will leave the word to Jasper again, so we can start the last part of this webinar, which is the Q&A section.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Rosella, I think, mentioned in the beginning, we have received already some questions while preparing for this webinar. So what we intend to do is that we try to answer all the questions to the best of our abilities. And of course, we have not seen the individual products, so we can answer only in more general terms. And my advice would always be to have your products assessed and all questions answered based on your information for your products that are specific. So please use these answers, but before you finalize your products or prepare your products for the EU market, please make sure that you work with a suitable expert with a lot of experience to prepare your products for the EU. And of course, you can do that with GSC and with TRC. So let's now first go to the first question that we have received when preparing for this webinar. Is there any relationship between CPNP and Cosmos? There's no clear relation between that because Cosmos standard defines the criteria that companies must meet to be able to state that a product is genuinely organic or natural, and that according to the Cosmos standards. So it is more about being or having organic products or having natural products. There is not a clear focus on product compliance and safety as defined in the cosmetic regulation. So these two different things. It is not the case that if your product has been Cosmos certified, that your product automatically is also considered to be compliant and safe in all aspects when selling on the EU market. Let's now go to the second question. What is the labeling guide for a small volume package? Of course, a shampoo bottle is quite big. A lot of information can be fitted on the product, but in some cases, products can be very small. Thinking about lip balms, lipstick, nail polish, and there's of course many other products. Some information may be printed on an attached leaflet or on a tag or on a card, secondary packaging such as the outer box. The full ingredient list and the mandatory warnings and precautions, they can be included in a leaflet, for example, but then the booklet symbol must be presented on the packaging. And for example, the batch number, you can only print that on the outer packaging if needed. So let's now go to the next question. Our perspective on cosmeceutical products in Europe. Cosmetics cannot claim any medical benefits. So therefore, cosmeceutical products cannot truly exist in Europe. Primary claims or the claims for cosmetics must stay within the official definition of a cosmetic product. And cosmetic products cannot claim any physiological effects. So you really have to make sure that, as I mentioned in one of the first slides, that a cosmetic product is to clean, to protect, to perfume, to change the appearance, etc., etc. That is what a cosmetic product is about, and that is what the claims or the primary claims of a cosmetic should be about. So, when exporting products out of the RP designated countries, is it illegal to put the label with the name of the domestic importer? It is important to make sure that when a product is sold in the EU market, that it always must contain the RP details, and that it must be clear that those details are of the RP. So it could be in some cases that there's two European entities on the label, but then it must be clear to the authorities which of the two is considered the responsible person and where the authorities should go to. I think that covers what we have stated here. Let's go to this next question. Do we need to register again if the packaging or design is changed? The CPNP is a notification, not a registration. So there's no approval process. This also makes it very easy to perform updates. You can go into CPNP and, for example, update or upload new artwork, or make a small change in the formulation, or include a new picture for the product. In CPNP, your notification must be always up to date at all times. So yes, if you have changes in your packaging, in your design, in anything, product naming, please share an updated version of the artwork and make sure that the responsible person updates the notification with that information. Can we notify hair growth shampoo products in CPNP? And are there any other tests that we need to have to register the product in the EU? Well, hair growth is claiming a physiological effect, which is outside of the definition of what a cosmetic product could be. So this is not allowed for cosmetics. You can, for example, state on a product that your product is contributing to healthy hair, or to contributing to normal growth, etc. That is allowed, but you cannot claim that your product is a hair growth product. This is a REACH-related question. REACH regulations and how to comply with REACH is quite a complicated topic. But let's go into this. Is the export of a product which contains ingredients that are not registered in REACH limited to 1 ton annually based on the final product, or is it based on the 1 ton usage unregistered ingredients? Under REACH, the total important substance volume of the full portfolio is important, and then you have to look at the full portfolio of all products that is imported by an individual importer. So it is not related to the total volume of the final product. So you really have to look at the ingredient in the products, then add all those volumes up together of that specific substance or specific inky. And if that goes over 1 ton annually for an individual importer, then you have to look into REACH registrations and making sure that you have REACH registrations in place, either yourself or somebody else in the supply chain, which could be a manufacturer of an ingredient, suppliers, or others. So I think that is important to mention. Please, you will be receiving this presentation, so please read this information carefully. And if you have any questions, of course, you can contact GSC to have more detail on REACH and REACH registration compliance. RP difference between CPNP and FDA or MOCRA. There are still a lot of things unclear related to MOCRA. We are continuously following it, but we feel and we see that many players and many people that work in compliance still have a lot of doubts on what exactly is the case and what is exactly meant with the regulations that have been published. To our knowledge, at this moment, it is not possible to mandate a third party to be responsible as defined in the EU and UK in the USA. The USA-based manufacturer or the USA importer, distributor, or packer, they are responsible under MOCRA. There are possibilities to appoint an agent, but it is unclear at the moment to us where the responsibilities begin and end and where the exact liabilities are when looking at the FDA and the US authorities to the RP, the brand owner, the manufacturer. Are there any specific standard specifications for raw materials or standard stability reports? Well, when purchasing, receiving and using raw materials in the production of cosmetics, it is important to work with a raw material specification, basically saying, I want to work with the raw material with this composition and with these characteristics. And this is what you request from your supplier when you contact suppliers of raw materials. Can you supply me with this raw material meeting these specifications? And when you receive the raw material and before you start production, you should check if the raw material that you are going to be using for the production of your cosmetic meets the requirements that you have set within the specification. And that is typically what you do based on a certificate of analysis that you have received from your supplier. Or, of course, you can also test yourself whether or not the raw material meets the specifications as you have defined them. So this about the raw materials, stability, when we talk about stability reports, they are relevant for the final cosmetic product because you use the raw materials, and then from that moment on, it becomes important what the stability of the formulation containing that mixture of raw materials in that specific packaging, how that stability performs and how long the shelf life of cosmetic products could be. So let's go to the next question. Is it possible to have different RPs for each product? Well, yeah, it is possible in practice. You will not see it a lot. The same product can be notified in CPNP by different RPs, but keep in mind that the product label must contain the RP details. So if you would have 2 times exactly the same product, you would have to create a different label, one with the RP details from one RP, and you would have to create a label with the RP details of the second RP. But it is not very logical that that will happen because you will not sell the same products with 2 different RPs on it, because of course this takes a lot of effort to create 2 different SKUs with 2 different labels. What is important to mention is that in case of changing RPs, which of course could sometimes happen, there are 2 options. The former RP can transfer responsibilities in CPNP to the new RP, which has to be accepted by the new RP. So basically the first RP can state, I want to transfer these products to the new RP. The new RP gets a message and can say, yes, I accept, or I do not accept. The old stock with the details of the former RP, they can continue to be sold. Of course, it depends a bit on your new RP, if they are willing to also support you with any questions and details around the products that have been sold before they became the RP. But in our case, if the products are compliant and safe, we are very willing to do that. The other option is that the new RP can perform a new notification and then make a new notification, and then it is irrelevant what happens with the old notification of the product. And both options are okay, and both options are almost the same amount of work for the new RP. So it does not make much of a difference which option you choose, but it is important to make sure that your all products that are still on the market, that they remain compliant and safe as defined under the cosmetic regulation. How to get safety data for plant extracted ingredients not listed in CIR or SCCS when performing the safety assessments. Well, While it is a logical option to ask the supplier of your raw material or ingredients to supply this information because they are selling a raw material or an ingredient to cosmetic manufacturers, this will always be a question that will be asked while assessing the compliance of the cosmetic products. So I would expect that most suppliers would have this information. Other options would be, for example, at TRC, we have an extensive toxicology database that may already contain toxicology information. So it could be worthwhile to check as a second option. You can also request an expert toxicologist to assess the safety based on read-across derived from known uses in food or comparable substances. So maybe you do not have information per se on that specific substance in that specific use, but it could be that an expert, based on the available information, can state, yes, I feel that for this slightly different use or for this slightly different substance, it is considered safe in this cosmetic product. And another option could be when quantities of that substance in the product are very, very low. It could be that you can use a so-called TTC approach to state that the product containing a very low amount of this substance quantity is safe. TTC stands for toxicological threshold of concern. Does CPNP apply to the Middle East countries? No. CPNP is something that you do in Europe. It is a notification in the cosmetic product notification portal of the EU. Of course, if you have EU compliant products with EU compliant PIFs, this is a good strategy to prepare for global compliance and global sales. But the Middle East and other countries and regions, they have similarly structured regulations, but there are differences. For example, in what substances are banned or what the exact thresholds for specific substances are. And you see big differences between registration procedures and registration systems. For example, in the Middle East, you have ECOSMA for Saudi Arabia. So the answer is no, but working with the EU process and with your EU compliant PIFs and products, you are quite well prepared for many other countries and regions. What is the process and what are the requirements for a change in ingredients in the formulation after CPNP registration, and how to update the safety assessment when changing ingredients? Well, then it's a bit from our perspective. From our perspective, it is you simply share the updated details as for any product or any new product, and then the PIF, the assessment, labels and claims and notifications will be updated as needed. So basically everything that's there will be used and the changes will be integrated, and then the process will be completed once more, and the notification will be updated as needed. Is it possible to directly export to a certain French company without responsible person? Well, a very short answer is yes, it's possible, but no, you should not do it, and you will probably not succeed. The French company will be considered the RP as a default, because they are importing the product into the EU, and by default they will be considered responsible. The French company will very likely not accept this because taking on these responsibilities could imply that they will be fined and that they will be inspected by the French authorities. So they will only do it if they feel they can meet the compliance requirements, so having all the information, having the details on the product, having the products notified. So no. I think the answer in short is no. Which tests or documents are required to use hair loss, acne, whitening, and dandruff for scarf treatment products? Well, I think this relates a little bit to the questions that we had before. Cosmetics cannot claim medical benefits. Treatment products cannot be assessed and registered as cosmetics in Europe. So preventing hair loss or stimulating hair growth and treatment of acne are not allowed for cosmetics. Of course, as mentioned before, it is possible to state that products are suitable to be used by people that suffer hair loss or acne. So it's more that it is suitable, but not that it is actually preventing or stimulating. When it comes to teeth whitening and anti-dandruff, these are allowed cosmetic product claims under certain conditions. So it depends a bit on the formulation and what ingredients have been used. And of course, if you make these claims, they must be supported with testing results where you can clearly show or prove that by using this product, your teeth are whiter and that you suffer less or no dandruff. For more information on labels, claims, testing, well, Rosella mentioned it already. You can register and attend for one of our future webinars that go into much more detail on this topic. Do we need two different safety assessment documents for CPNP and SCPN? If a product is sold in both EU and the UK, you have to assess for compliance both for the EU as the UK, looking at both regulations. You can do this in 2 reports or you can do it in 1 report. But of course, you have to look at what substances are banned or regulated, in what way, and if there are any differences between the EU and the UK. What you have to keep in mind is that you have to notify products 2 times. So once for the EU in CPNP and once for the UK in SCPN. And you have to state in your reports that you have assessed according to both regulations. And you have to keep in mind that English is the required language for the UK. So you have to make sure that wherever you are based, that English is also accepted for the EU market. You see there are some differences between EU countries, but in general, it should be fine if you have an English report where you state that you have assessed the products for compliance with the EU and UK regulations. What is important to realize, and that also is related to continuous compliance monitoring, there are differences between the EU and the UK, and what we see is that they are increasing. So you have to continuously keep an eye on what is changing in the EU, what is changing in the UK, and if you're selling in both, check your formulations and your products related to the changes in both jurisdictions. I think this was the last question that we have included in this presentation.
Thank you so much, Jasper, for all your explanation. Before we leave you, I just wanted to mention that another additional service that now GSC can offer to you to support your export process to EU is the anti-aging lab. In fact, GSC created an anti-aging lab this year, which can support you with all the clinical trial that you need to submit in order to use the claim on your product label. So please contact us anytime if you need additional information. Besides that, thank you, Jasper, for joining us, and I wish this webinar somehow helpful to you to understand better what you need to prepare to export your cosmetic product to you. So thank you. Thank you, Jasper.
Thank you very much.